It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to the Michigan Women's Foundation for having me. I find myself here from the big city of New York, and envious, actually, of this amazing community that you have built and grown. So congratulations. I'm here today to share my work and story with you in support of the Michigan Women's Foundation, an incredible forward-thinking nonprofit that lifts up women and girls in Michigan. To frame this talk, I'd like to start by reading out the Foundation's mission statement, a powerful manifesto that sums up who they are and where they're going. Michigan Women's Foundation's mission is to transform Michigan to achieve equality and empowerment for women and girls. The words equality and empowerment are important words. Michigan Women's Foundation has a 29-year history, and those words, equality and empowerment for women and girls, are as relevant today as they were 3 decades ago. I'd like to share my story with you to highlight, one, how philanthropy is changing, and Catchafire is an example of that, and two, the work that still needs to be done to level the playing field for women and girls. Catchafire is the world's largest skills-based volunteer platform. What this means is that we make it easy for professionals like you to find short-term, on average 30 hours in length, volunteer projects with nonprofits you care about that need your skills. Marketing skills, tech skills, design skills, finance skills, strategy skills. Our goal is to make it easy for you to access great volunteer opportunities that fit your skill sets and your cause interests so that you can volunteer to your highest and best use. 5 years ago, before Catchafire was born, it was nearly impossible to find a way to volunteer your on-the-job skills. Where would you go if you were a branding expert and you wanted to volunteer your brand messaging skills? I wanted to volunteer my own financial skills, so out of frustration that a platform like this didn't exist, I eventually built Catchafire. In the beginning, my guess was that other people felt the same way that I did and wanted to volunteer their skills. But I didn't have the statistics to back up that gut feeling. Today, I have those stats. Last year, LinkedIn reported that 82% of over 300 million members want to volunteer their skills. This is an astounding number, one, because of its sheer size, but two, because it means that there are more people out there who want to give their time and their skills than there are nonprofit needs. Imagine, there is more demand to help than the help that's needed. This is amazing, but it's also not surprising to me. Today, more than ever, we are hungry, even desperate to find purpose, to feel as if we matter, and a great volunteer experience has a power to make you feel like you matter. People are demanding more of giving. Millennials, in particular, are demanding more out of giving. They aren't as interested in the traditional form of simply donating money, which is transactional. They want to see exactly where their money goes, and they want the agency to determine what impact their giving will have on the world. A la the rise of sites like Kiva, Donors Choose, Indiegogo, and Kickstarter. Millennials are leading the way in changing philanthropy as their expectations are to gain an experience from giving, and they want their giving to truly matter. This is a great thing. My own personal story in starting Catchafire is a pretty typical millennial story. Catchafire was born almost 5 years ago from 2 personal experiences. The first was when I was an investment banker right out of college. One year, for one day of the year, the bank had a volunteer day where they would put all of the bankers on the bus to go build a house or work in a soup kitchen. One year, I was in a build site, and I found myself with a hammer in hand, and no idea what to do with myself. It was frustrating and disempowering. Later, when I learned that the house we built was torn down the next day, only to be built back up by professional builders, I was livid. I felt like 100 talented people had wasted their time under the guise of making a difference. What made me really mad was that these folks could have actually made a difference. We just needed to try harder to find those good opportunities for them. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about how we could make volunteering more impactful if we could give what we are truly good at. I became obsessed with figuring out a way to volunteer my finance skills. I searched for 6 months, but I couldn't find a skills-based volunteer opportunity that fit my busy schedule. And that's when the idea struck. Someone needed to create a site that matches professionals who want to volunteer their skills with nonprofits that need their help. To be honest, I didn't think that I would be the one to build that site. In fact, I ended up quitting banking to go into the nonprofit sector. I went into microfinance, and I was lucky to work for one of the best nonprofits in the world. BRAC is a poverty alleviation organization headquartered out of Dhaka, Bangladesh, and is the largest nonprofit in the world, serving 140 million people in Asia and Africa. BRAC takes a holistic approach to poverty alleviation with massive programs in microfinance, education, and health. They also have very powerful programs for women and girls. I spent a few months working in Bangladesh, but most of my time was spent helping to start up BRAC USA, the US foundation of BRAC. I started as an intern, and I was the only staff person working with the new president and CEO. Because it was only me, I needed a lot of help. So I started to ask my friends to work with me on short projects that would take our organization to the next level. I scoped out these projects for them that were time-bound and deliverable-based, managed 9 of my friends over 9 months, and it worked. We raised tens of millions of dollars for BRAC in less than a year. Most impactful for me was that I learned about the power of using skills-based volunteers to build capacity for a resource-constrained nonprofit. It was after this that I decided Catchafire had to be built. Over the past 4.5 years, Catchafire has served nearly 2,500 nonprofits across the country and facilitated nearly 4,000 skills-based volunteer projects to generate over $42 million in project value and tens of millions more in long-term impact. To me, one of the most exciting things that comes out of a Catchafire experience is the meaningful long-term relationship that a professional builds with the nonprofit she's working for. It's not unusual for our professionals, after short-term 30-hour project, to stay on as long-term volunteers or to be invited to join the advisory council or the board. It's a little-known fact, but there is a 40% volunteer dropout rate in this country. What this means is that 40% of the people who volunteer this year will not volunteer again next year. Unfortunately, this is mostly because people aren't given great volunteer experiences. Catchafire is fighting to change this. We are working to shape up the volunteer sector so it can be even more powerful than it is today. Imagine how much we can do when bankers can volunteer their banking skills, when marketing people can volunteer their marketing skills, when engineers can volunteer their engineering skills. Every year, about 65 million Americans volunteer, mostly on manual labor projects. Imagine when every American can volunteer their unique skills and talents. Philanthropy is already changing, and it will change even more when we can deliver people great volunteer experiences. I'm excited that Catchafire gets to play a role in expanding philanthropy to be not just about giving money, but also about giving time and talent. Different than giving money, which is transactional and awesome, and you should all do it today. What's special about giving your time is that in doing so, you are buying yourself an experience. Catchafire's goal is to make that experience as impactful or as transformational as possible. And the vision we are working towards is a world where it's normal for people to volunteer to their highest and best use. You shouldn't be surprised to hear that Michigan Women's Foundation gets this skills-based volunteer trend. You should be proud to support such an innovative and forward-looking organization. The second issue I'd like to talk about is the central topic of equality and empowerment for women and girls. As I mentioned earlier, this topic is as relevant and as important today as it was decades ago. While much has been accomplished over the past few decades to achieve equal rights for women in this country, our work is not done. On paper, women have equal rights. But in reality, it's not playing out like this. Because for us to live in a world where women are actually equal and empowered, we need to make them feel equal and empowered. There are many statistics that show that we are far from this goal. Here are a few. The pay gap affects women of all backgrounds, but unsurprisingly, race and ethnicity matter when it comes to women's paychecks. Hispanic and Latina women face the worst disparity, getting paid only 40% of what white men get paid. Despite higher salaries and greater prospects for employment for science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM careers, the pipeline continues to be dominated by men. Among computing and engineering fields, which account for 80% of STEM jobs, women represent less than 1/4 of the workers. Thank you, Patty, for being a role model in that space. Globally, the US is lagging. In its most recent Global Gender Gap Report, the World Economic Forum ranked the US 60 among 136 countries for women's political empowerment. The ranking places the United States behind India, China, and Uganda for women's equality and political leadership. Hopefully this changes in 2016. And despite representing more than half of professional level jobs, women's leadership within the boardrooms of America has stagnated in recent years. Among the Fortune 500, women lead only 4.6% of companies. For most women and girls, equality and empowerment are personal issues. Women understand what equality means because we've felt inequality. We also understand what empowerment means because we have felt disempowered for no fault of our own other than the fact that we are anatomically different than a man. Unfortunately, still today, I believe that every woman experiences sexism on a regular basis, even if she doesn't recognize it. For me, women's equality and empowerment is also a personal issue. I feel the tug of equality and inequity, empowerment and disempowerment on a daily basis. I often operate in spaces that are disproportionately male-dominated. Take the tech sector, for instance. Only 4% of venture-backed companies are founded by women. In the corporate sector, less than 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. In our society's most coveted positions of power, men still dominate by a wide margin. There have been 43 American presidents, that is 238 years of leadership. And still, this great country has not yet been led by a woman. I recognize that I am a woman in an unusual situation. I am a founder of a tech company. I am a CEO. I am invited to events and clubs that are 90% men, and more frequently than not, I am in meetings with only men. This is not an enviable position, but an interesting one. How did I get here? I chalk a lot of this up to how I was raised. I grew up in an environment that was the perfect breeding ground for me to become an empowered woman in a position of power. When I was a child growing up in Australia, my dad and mother owned and ran several restaurants. When those failed because of an economy that tanked in the late 80s, my mom got a job as an Australian diplomat and took the whole family on a 10-year journey around the world. I lived a privileged life as an expatriate, going to the best schools and traveling everywhere and anywhere. My mother was the primary breadwinner from when I was 8 through to when I left home for college. My mother paid for my college and for my graduate school. I went to an elite liberal arts school in New York City, Barnard, the Women's College of Columbia University, had most of my classes with brilliant women who were taught by brilliant women, and then went off to have jobs where I worked for strong, empowered women. The reason why I share all of this with you is to make the point that I may be an empowered woman, less because I chose to be empowered, and more so because I was raised to be empowered. I was raised by an empowered woman and had many other empowered women usher me through my girlhood into an empowered womanhood. I had everything to set me up to become an empowered woman. I know I am darn lucky. I know that my background is unusual, and I don't take that for granted. But even as an empowered woman, I am not immune from the reality of an unequal and disempowering world for women. What's humbling is that despite my privileged lot in life, not a week goes by without me being reminded that I am a young minority woman and that most of the time I just don't fit in. Men are seldom reminded that they are men because only people in the minority, aka the lesser position, are reminded of the fact that they are different. Over the past 5 years as an entrepreneur, I have built up a thick skin, but it still stings when I enter a boardroom and everyone assumes that I'm the most junior person on the team. It still stings when the first thing someone asks me is not my opinion, but how old I am. It frankly still hurts to be underestimated and put into a box. Oh, and it hurts way worse when it's the women who are being sexist. But most people aren't intentionally sexist. They are unintentionally so. But this doesn't make it excusable. In fact, it indicates something very scary, that lots of incidents of sexism aren't even considered sexism because it's become normal. A sexist culture is so deeply embedded into what is the norm that it's hard for us to even recognize that we have a problem. We have a lot of work to do, but I venture to put out a thought and a request to all the women and girls in the room who I beseech to own their own power. When you are made to feel different, lesser, like you don't belong, the natural feelings that arise are feelings of inferiority and inadequacy, i.e., I'm not a man, I'm not white, I'm not tall enough, I'm not old enough. But it is at these exact moments that you have the power to empower yourself. When you feel those feelings of inferiority and inadequacy, take those feelings and flip them. For me, I let those feelings become feelings of injustice, anger, and then more constructively, pride, and I'll prove you wrong attitude. If you see those moments not as moments to be embarrassed, but as moments where instead you feel special because you are different, then you can turn that sexism right on its head and use it to empower you to become even more powerful. I know it's not easy. It may not even be possible to do this yourself, which is exactly why the Michigan Women's Foundation is so important. We need to support organizations like the Michigan Women's Foundation, whose job it is to bring equality and empowerment to women and girls here in your home state. It is a privilege to be given the opportunity to give back to such an important cause. Please take advantage of the opportunity to give in a way that changes you. Thank you.